Good evening. This is Ronald Allen with Managing Change, and the discussion on the table is let's elevate the species. I did a montage about a month, 2 months ago, put it up on the web of characters and dignitaries, social and community stakeholders. And over the last 2 months or so, I've got a lot of information, a lot of feedback, a lot of comments. Well, if you go to the site ronaldmallen.com, go over to resources, and look at the blog that starts up with the term or the heading, Let's Elevate the Species. I also posted it, I believe, on Google, Facebook, even on LinkedIn, and of course, the feed went to Twitter. And a lot of the comments I heard regarding this was, well, what has this got to do with managing change with effective communications? Well, I was a little surprised that people thought it had nothing to do with it, because these were leaders, statesmen, again, social and civic-minded stakeholders who communicated their belief, their need to help, to contribute, to uplift others, and to begin to replace, shall we say, repressive regimes. And I wanted to address that in the following way. I know a lot of people start off by saying we are being subjected to. Unfortunately, that direction in conversation does not endear nor create collaborative interests by the majority of people, humans, people who are going about their daily lives. What is also interesting is that the strategy that these concerned citizens, humanitarians, if you wish, many of them were, begins to pull together the need to broaden our understanding of how we communicate, what is the effect of that communication, and does it again divide and separate, as opposed to informing others that this is a process whereby we're constantly being marginalized. So let me kind of jump into this. If you want, you can certainly look up, and I went to my site because it's just an easier site to get to, but certainly on Google, LinkedIn, my site, ronaldmallen.com, go over to resources. You don't have to type in your name or anything on the registration page, just click that off. Go over to resources, jump down to blog, Ronald's blogs, and then Let's Elevate the Species. I think it's the third or fourth one. I haven't been doing too many blogs. I will start to, promise. And you're going to see a picture of people like Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Now, how many of you know that Jorge Mario Bergoglio is actually referred to as Pope Francis? He's of Brazilian descent. He is the latest pope. And what's interesting is that he doesn't have the name Francis. At least this is from this little research that I quickly did. He is the head of the Catholic Church. It is a big deal. It sends a message. And what is interesting is in that communication of not using his natural name, what are we actually saying? What are we actually believing in? It's not questioning the theology. It is the way that we select to represent individuals with a name that hold very high office in socially recognized, globally recognized positions. Now, you might say, not an issue. Okay, let's say we bought that argument, however you placed it, however you framed it. And let's go a step further when we're in the weeds of everyday life. And someone comes up to you and says, my name is Shula Musakanya. Now, that's a gentleman I went to school with, and I loved his name. I thought it was very rich. My name is Ronald M. Allen. wonderful. There's about 20 pages at the time in the white pages of the phone book, the one that was 2-3 inches thick back in the day, TET 60. And very common name. Also went to school with a gentleman called Kajda from Poland. And we didn't abbreviate their names. We learned to pronounce and spell their names. When we address them accordingly. What does that say about the need to get on with that relationship? Because after all, a name, an address, a salutation, if you write letters, if you text, if you send email, you're writing a salutation. What does that say about us? Is the speed at which we communicate as important as how we frame our message? And here's an interesting twist to that. When Twitter came out with its 140, 170 characters, many people were like, how am I going to send my message? And I, for one, comes from an essay background. I was like, well, this is ridiculous. What I subsequently learned, though, is that the tweet was to gain attention. The attachment link syncing was to then expand, allow you to go and see more. You had to still follow a protocol, an etiquette. I think, personally, names should remain whole. Okay, we have another gentleman here. If you're looking on the web, again, you can certainly go onto LinkedIn, just type in let's elevate the species, and I'm sure this article will come up because it's the only one with a graphic. It's almost like a pictorial. It is a pictorial. It's a montage of these people's faces. The second one is Barack Hussein Obama. Now that, it was very controversial. What is interesting is that in America, and certainly in the West, if we subscribe the pre-decided opinion of someone's name, we would push back without validating that it's just a name. Yes, it was a name that was vilified, Hussein. Yes, it was a name that was attributed to an individual that some subscribed to as a negative. On the other hand, there are many names throughout history. My wife's name, Miriam, Sea of Sorrows. Yet many people do not even know that it related to that life of pain and suffering that a character had been subscribed to. That was the name. And there are many other names. You, I'm sure, have terms that in your life you have seen. Then I went on to, and you'll see Aung San Suu Kyi. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Here's a woman in formerly Burma who had fought the Chinese, and was interesting because there were many other government global forces who impacted the country because of trade. And her husband, who was a British, if not dignitary, parliamentary member, who died outside of Burma, and she was not allowed to go and come back because she was fighting her country's civil unrest at the time. Now, her name, you really can't change, and you shouldn't change. What is interesting about the three people that I mentioned is that they all try to communicate a more inclusive message and policy. Again, there are many dynamics to this. There's the global picture, there's corporate interests, global corporate interests, there's special interests within the country, and most importantly, no one is going to be, or everyone is not going to be 100% satisfied. So how does that help you? Let's kind of pull back a second. Thrown out three pretty big images of people who impact you in one way or another: conversation, belief, theology, political preference. How can you take these characteristics and make them your own, use them for yourself? Well, number one, are you sold on what it is that you're trying to represent, speak about, talk to, convince the other person or body of people? So I jump now to a business concept. This is a concept that was more than likely originated by a gentleman called Alan Weiss, Alanweiss. He has been a leader in value-based proposition in business. He hails from Union, New Jersey, as I like to say, Podunk, USA, and he's made an incredible career out of using psychology and social behavior to win over on projects that a desired outcome, objective, optimum goal had been identified. And you can certainly find him at Summit. Oh my goodness. Well, type in Alan, Alan, space Weiss, Weiss, Summit Consulting, of course. He's done extremely well for himself, and I do follow his studies. As I mentioned, there are a number of people that I am following, and I consider them mentors. They don't have to necessarily meet me, or we have to have a conversation. I read their material. So I want to use this conceptual agreement format to highlight what these people have done, are doing, so that we can walk away with some actionable steps. Now, you know, I always say, life doesn't come at us as 1, 2, 3 steps, right? Do, re, mi, A, B, C. It doesn't. So it's up to you to learn to apply these steps, and I'm going to give them to you in the order that they are. Don't expect the conversation with the party across the table, and certainly with family members, to walk through steps 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's not what we're doing here. In managing change through effective communication, it's understanding when to use tools, methods, processes, techniques, gambits to cull a mutually beneficial outcome for all parties. And that is different. That is still more of a strange environment that you would find yourself in. But let me kind of finish off with some of these other people, because they are very significant. One, I have to play on the pronouncement tool. That's what I love about technology. You don't have to know everything. And again, you know, managing change through effective communications, looking at these tools. Let me see if I have this one correctly. Here's one that I know you do not know. Mother Teresa. We now know that the establishment in the Catholic Church has made her a saint. But did you know that she is actually from Albania? Another country whose people have been incredibly impoverished and constantly in struggle. So here's a woman, and I'm going to play her name. I'm hoping you're going to hear it. Tell me if you don't, but you should, because the speaker is pretty close. This is her name.
The correct pronunciation of this word is
Agnes Gonja Boyjanju. Now, that is a mouthful. That is a mouthful. And again, what is interesting is that we tend to clarify people's names, terms, situations, maybe even explaining away a negative situation by simplifying it, dumbing it down. Now, in some respects, initially, you might say, well, that's great. You know, let's keep it simple. Let's not cause any issues. What if, by going a little deeper, spending a little bit more time on a topic without blame, in seeking how it manifests, we actually resolve and move on to how it would not minimize how it would happen in the future? It takes a little bit more thinking, it takes a little bit more time, it takes a little bit more forethought. Yet, when you speak to people after the fact, they're much more comfortable with working with you in the future. You've kind of laid down goodwill. You've prepped with some rapport with them, instead of just brushing, sweeping the issue under the rug, saying, don't worry about it. And of course, in many cases, it pops its head up again in a different venue, different situation. And most importantly, in business, it will pop up by someone saying to you, you're not going to be part of this group. Or we need you just to be, don't offer any opinions. And I've seen this as well. So be careful with the quick fix. Okay, taking the time, and you're going to see this as I talk about it in the conceptual agreement pieces, and I'll make them relevant, of course. Taking the time up front, preparing the soil, laying the groundwork, putting in the right footings, all of those preparations, risk management, we talk about that all the time in project management, right? That's where you gain an upper hand for things that are still to come. And in negotiation, it's everything. We can see that across all industries, whether it's construction, whether it's family dynamics, whether it's mediation, arbitration, the need for negotiations with corporate, union, and everything in between. So also another lady who made some significant changes in the medical field back in 1881. Do you remember that time? Mary Sicole, she was a nurse. We used to call them LPNs, RNs. For babies. The name just jumped right out of my head. Here is a woman, just like another person I'm going to talk about, Helen Keller, who through fortitude and professional execution of her duties showed that a group of females were more than significant and important in times of aiding people who were sick, who were traumatized, who were physically abused because of war, because of the civil unrest. And she was from Jamaica, and she was at a time where there weren't this immediate recognition through broadcasting, or even the Pony Express, way before. And she endured a lot of hostile conversations in the midst of executing her duties. So again, how do we benefit from that? How do we learn and then begin to reform our minds when we are being abused, when we are being berated, both in public or private, family or business? I personally pull these people to my mind. This is my committee. This is my safe haven, if you will. And I say, what did they endure? Why did they endure? Because they had a bigger, better goal. They weren't going to let the pebble in the shoe distract them. They would take the shoe off, pour the pebble out. If they couldn't do that, they would push the pebble to the side of the shoe. If you ever heard of that kind of thinking, right? If you can't move something out of your way, move it to a place where it's less uncomfortable. So these are philosophical approaches, actually, to day-to-day challenges that we all face. Do you know them? Can you apply them? Do you know how to apply them? Do you want to apply them? And you're going to hear that one in conceptual agreement. Of course, one of the biggest recognized changes just happened this year is Harry and Meghan, the royal family of England. Interestingly enough, one of the most recent prime ministers had argued for the dismantlement of the monarchy and the royal family because it served no true economic benefit. Again, communications changing over time, identifying the shift in recognized real asset that such an institution represented, and most importantly, what I've learned from reading about Tony Blair's attempts to do that, he was the Prime Minister of England, was that the economic value of such an institution represented a negative to the country because of the shift in so many new immigrants coming in. And remember, my parents were immigrants back in 55, 56. So you're talking the better part of 50 years that it's taken for this to happen. She is, as we know, from a so-called mixed family. And I challenge you with that term. Is not, I'm hoping that makes sense, is not an Italian and French a mixed family? Is color the only defining recognized characteristic? We know Irish and English, Scottish and French and Belgian and from those from Gibraltar, their cultures themselves would always argue, why are you marrying into this other race? We call it a race today. We won't get into that right now. Another gentleman. But that is very significant, Harry and Meghan, because what you're seeing is an economic gambit being executed. So down the road, you're going to see some very interesting economic moves, some very interesting relationships happening. And quite frankly, it's interesting because if you've ever heard of the term prima noce, it was when the lord or the baron of the land would copulate with your wife on the night of your marriage so that they begin to breed out the hostility. And as much as I joke, it's a very serious, very strategic gambit, quite frankly. And it made for the institution of slavery, which came much later, a very natural procession of how to control another group of people. So they had done it to the Gaelics, Welsh, Irish, Scottish, the different tribes in England, the different tribes of Europe. We kind of forget that, right? We've forgotten that these were tribes. They have been settled, they have been wedded, they have been traded. And so everyone else, as colonization continues to spread, whether it's Genghis Khan, whether it's Shaka Zulu, it doesn't matter. The methodology to pull, harness the resources, that's the message, that's the communication. It's how we address that communication now. That's what is significant. I'm not going to get into that. It's a point that needs to be made because of what we're seeing with Harry and Meghan. Okay, it is a recognized conversation that certainly can be developed. Helen Keller, how can you convince a group of scientists and physicians and doctors that someone who was born mute and in some cases at that time certainly mentally deficient, how did this woman, also a woman who had no economic value at the time, so you got almost 3-4 strikes against you before you even come out of the gate, how does a woman turn a whole industry behind mental health? Once again, what is your conviction? What is driving you? What's convincing you that this is the path you wish to take? It's definitely not right or wrong. It's a movement that certain people seem to have, and they just go for it. They don't need a litany or a prologue to tell them that this is right or wrong. They feel it instinctively. And I think in our conversation with ourselves, and that's why I keep talking about speaking to yourself first, is there doubt? Is there conviction that what you're doing, no matter how it turns out, there's the rub, this is what you're going to do? Of course, one gentleman who I respect immensely, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, and another gentleman that most of you do not know, Edward Coley Mabo, M-A-B-O. Why? He is what we refer to, unfortunately, as an Aborigine, which is definitely not the term. He's native to the country. If you've ever seen rabbit-proof fences, you'll know how they colonized and educated out a whole culture, right? Again, we take these conversations, this history, and we position it against the challenges we're experiencing, and we become stronger because we know ancestors, whether they're ours or not, by the way, we're all being conditioned to be part of the new world order. How do you stop that? How do you hold it back? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm just going to throw it out there. Here's a gentleman, by the way, Edward Mabo, who died before the natives of Australia. As you know, their land was taken away. They could not own land. They could not have title. And before, just after he died, the high courts reinstituted the right to have land. Of course, we know certain limitations. Excuse me. But the conversation is that the natives of Australia are now allowed to not only own land, they are now represented in government, in registrations, in voting. And that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. Mahatma Gandhi speaks volumes of how you topple the overriding restraints of the British Empire, primarily. The Belgians were certainly in there, the Dutch, in South Africa at the time, against his own people, because he was from a privileged family. The message of this elevating the species is to bring everyone along, to elevate people and move them out of this subservient thinking. There are no scarce resources. It's scarce resources at what price? Scarce resources at what inconvenience? That's when we talk about effective communications. We must talk in true terms. There are a few others. I'm going to leave it at that because I want to get into the conceptual agreement, because I think that's really going to pull it together. Do some research. Find and identify people that you can identify with, and you will see that their convictions and the way that they convey that is to cause collaborative dynamics instead of separating people. Okay, that's the challenge. Communication is easy if you don't address the hard fact of listening to the other person, understanding their position, and qualifying. Is that really a reality? Do you really think that just because a group of people are beginning to be the majority, that the way of life is going to change all of a sudden? Right? That's one of the fears right now in America. It's always been. I can tell you about another gentleman, Enoch Powell, in England in the 50s and 60s. Same expression. So the conversation cannot be hostile. That is what is expected. The conversation cannot be individualized to one group of people, because that's what allows this behavior to perpetuate. If you identify this global effect and begin to say, well, how can we better serve the population of the earth? And I know it sounds like a big deal, yet look at the injustice and the lack of equality from the economic perspective, And yet that lack of equality is required to sustain this type of capitalism across the globe. And in fact, in India, Benazir Bhutto, she was the first female prime minister of Pakistan, a Muslim country, by the way. And yes, she was assassinated, but she was president twice. When you realize that the need to express yourself and why you don't is because of these very basic, well, not basic, but entrenched behaviors, social pressures, economic preferences towards one group and not to the whole, to the masses. Because it is the masses that produces our lifestyle. Everything I have here is because of other people perhaps not being educated, not being shown, not being given an opportunity. And ironically, as we've seen with even Oprah Winfrey, with her school, with the girls, incredible things will happen. And I believe it was, oh my goodness, the poet, she passed away relatively recently. She said Oprah Winfrey said, my greatest legacy is giving the children an opportunity. And Maya Angelou, thank you. Maya Angelou retorts, you don't know your greatest legacy. That's what managing change through effective communication is really all about. When you change the future opportunity through the mind of an individual, you have no idea what your legacy is. And even when I came to this country in 69, well, my mother came in 69, so I guess it was 71, 72. One thing that struck me was the freedom of how Americans think. And yes, of course, today I feel I have that. Do I? So let's move into conceptual agreement, and we're going to kind of blow through this because this is really some good stuff. As an individual, when you're going out on your daily chores, engaging with other people, negotiating with all manner of stakeholders, whether it's a job, a bank, buying a car, buying a house, buying groceries, buying furniture. I know my niece out in California, she negotiates everything. She looks at a price and wants to get it lower. That is absolutely fantastic. Why should you take the price that's displayed at face value? That says everything. So the first thing you want to do is, again, as I mentioned, these are not steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. I just don't believe in that construct. I think that, yes, there is a meandering path in engaging people and engaging processes. At the same time, the curveball, the left field shot, the shot in the dark, all those expressions which we spoke about before, about certain colloquialisms, they come about. And are you now prepared and able to counter those measures, right? We call them countermeasures in the military. I'm not military. I just learned that stuff. Okay. So number one, you have to be agile. Number two, you have to be ready for the shot out of nowhere. Okay. That's number one. Qualifying the prospect. Are you speaking to the right person? Is the person even ready to hear you? Or are they just saying, come on in, let's talk and get it done with? Are they the right person? Are they the final decision maker? And if they're not, you should back off because you're wasting your time. Alan also mentions Alan Weiss. This is the article information I'm taking from his reporting. And this is at least 10 years old, at least. Yet again, it holds value. It holds its weight because the processes we have don't just disappear. Qualifying the prospect. Ask the similar question 2 or 3 times. When you ask your child, have you finished your homework? Yes, I have. And you say, did you finish the calculus? You know, like, what? Yeah, I finished the calculus. You might go again. A specific question that was asked in his calculus, or a set of questions that were in the calculus. You're digging deeper. Henry Kissinger used to do that with his students in Harvard. He would say, have you finished the essay? Yes, sir. Here's the essay. Here's the report. Here's the research. He says, And he'll take it the next day. He hasn't read it, by the way. The next day he comes back and says, you got to do better. Research that one article. And he might read one sentence. My English teacher used to do something similar. He would say, watch the conjunctive or subjective. I don't remember those terms anymore. I'm way too old for that. Although, of course, it does bear resemblance to speaking correctly. So, qualifying the prospect. One, are you speaking to the right person? Two, is this the person that can make the decision? Are they in the right frame of mind? Or do they have something else on their mind? Are you ready? Did you prep yourself? And then qualifying the prospect. Is this the right time? Do they have the right budget? Have they thought about a budget? When you're speaking to your parents, right? Is mom and dad on the same wavelength? Or is mom in one way and dad is in another corner? How can you bring them together? Finding the economic buyer. If it's your parents, does one sway over another? If you're talking to get a promotion, to get a raise, did you look at the quarterly reports? Did you see in your department that they're doing well, they're not doing well? Did you speak to your lover that night to see if you can have horizontal enrichment? Or did they come home with something on their mind that if you address first, you get your horizontal enrichment? Dorothy, my wife, my brother's former wife, she's passed away, would explain to us, she would come in on Sundays and say, Ron, did you have your horizontal enrichment today? She's a beautiful woman. Beautiful woman. Finding the economic buyer, that's absolutely crucial. Do they have someone else that they need to speak to? Right? The decision you're trying to get, the decision to get a discount, to get a consideration, to have a day off. Is that person in HR the right person to cajole the situation, right? That's what conversation is really all about. Asking questions, probing a little bit more, taking a little bit more time to get your way. That's all. That's all that's at stake. Rebutting objections. That's where the conversation really starts, by the way. We know in all sales, more importantly, with family. Listen to a child in the park. Mommy, 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 daddy, 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 I want this, I want this, I want this. No, why not? Well, because I said so. It's not good enough. Right? That's not good enough. Got to give me a better reason, dude. In business, it is specious. We use that term, specious. In other words, it's not grounded on anything. We say that the person is not in the position to give a real opinion. So how do you address that? And Alan Weiss is a master at this part. He says, you know what? So that you're not seen as the bad guy, let me talk to that decision maker. You've just made an end run with the person's permission. Strategy, tactical, specific. Should I address that in the proposal? If you're doing a memo, even if you're doing a memo, it doesn't have to be a contract. You're writing up an incident. You're talking about a report to consider a project, the purchase of something, to consider moving or the installation, right? Shall I address that, or do you want to be the one to put in the editorial comments or the text or the pricing, right? The objective here is not to be defensive. It's to engage the other person. Let them be part of the solution. You've heard me say that before. Peter Drucker talked about that for decades. Embrace a person's culture, social, religious convictions, and you will have them for life. But be honest, earnest about that. Have the right attitude, have the right intent, because they will go the extra mile. They will sweat the extra blood for you. This is not just a recital of facts. This is understanding the right positioning and timing to be utilized so everybody walks away with mutually beneficial outcomes. Establishing objectives. What are the challenges? What do I have to do to make this work? What do I not have to do? I remember trying to secure some work with a college institution, and I said, and it was interesting because a couple of months later, went to a procurement fair, and it was all educational institutions, Princeton, Sony, New York University, Stockton, etc., Rowan, etc. And they said, don't talk in salesman's talk. In other words, you're not selling me something. The terms and words we use are everything. So establishing objectives is, how can we help your students find the right program? Not course. Well, they can use the course, but we're not selling them a package. We're finding the right course. We're finding the right program. Different words in different environments, different jargon. Let me use that to kind of summarize that. The right jargon in the right industry, right? Results are trying to be accomplished. What results are trying to be accomplished? What are the objectives? What are the goals? Who's going to be accountable for this, right? What are their concerns? What were their concerns in the previous project? What are their concerns now? And are they in line with corporate strategy, corporate objectives? Who should we work with to mitigate situations when they arise, known and unknown, right? What are conforming requests that we need to be focused on, and what are not? That's also very important, right? How would you value the proposition? How would you value the proposition? Is it something that's high on the radar or not so much? You're kind of circling back around, by the way, to the qualifying objectives. Establishing metrics. How will we know? What will it sound like? What will it feel like? Right? Will it be objective, quantifiable? Is it anecdotal? Right? Is it anecdotal? We have less complaints. We have less escalations. Did a project with the Delaware Cooperative, Electric Cooperative, and the employees were concerned because the management, once a customer escalated an issue, management changed the whole game plan. So we structured a series of metrics. How will we know that we've achieved a better performance because of the program that I administered? And they said, minimizing escalations. So we said, what are the goals? What are the responsibilities of the frontline employees? They were in customer service. And we made a list. And we said, well, how would we address these? And then we shot that back to management. And they said, well, yeah, we can associate this. We can change that. We can allow the employees certain credits, certain latitude with certain employees, and then they categorize the customers. They categorize the customers. That is effective communications, because now everybody has brought out their laundry, and we've also categorized that laundry so that the frontline employees know what to do given certain customers, and management is going to reinforce that message even if the customer keeps pushing to get a manager, because that's what they have become accustomed to. The metrics set the objectives on the customer, so you as the service provider, employee, can meet, understand, know what you have to do to meet those metrics. They can be subjective. They are obviously also preferred objective, but that has to be defined with the stakeholders making that decision. Assessing value. What does it mean? What will it do for us as a company? What will it do for us internally, communications-wise, relationship-wise? How would you actually assess it? Return on investment, return on assets, return on sales. Will it minimize risk? Will it increase performance? Will it improve social media, which today is that intangible asset, that goodwill on the balance sheet, if you will? What is the intangible impact, right? Personally, the conversation, in project management now in the 6th edition, they talk about formal and informal conversation, because the conversation that two parties have offline impacts a project so significantly that it's now part of the curriculum. It's taken a while to come on board, to be a formal part of the curriculum, yet it is now part of that. Determining the budget range. Well, are you going to be using cost accounting, where subject to recognizing the value, it's really not a budget expense? Or is it a new line item? How do you justify that? Are funds allocated? Will they have to go to a committee, a board? Is it out of a certain department's budget? Even with a family, you have X amount of dollars coming in and you have to spend X amount of dollars. So you allocate based on those metrics, based on those objectives that you wish to achieve, based on the input of people that say, yes, it's doable, no, it's not, within the timelines. Now, I'm going to finish up there, and I'm going to quickly just sprint back to let's elevate the species. So here's a question that I'm going to leave you. If what you believe in is not going to be accomplished in your time, in other words, you're going to be dead, gone, turned to dust, you are worm food. Sorry, had to wake you up. Would you still do it? Would you still believe in it? Remember, I told you that's part of this as well, this conceptual agreement. The last, most important aspect of all of this conversation is, do you believe in what you're doing? Are you convinced? Are you convicted to go the distance? And if you're not, you need to take a pause. Rest if you must, but don't you quit. These people did not quit. Mahatma Gandhi, even the Prime Minister of Sweden, who was against apartheid, one of the last European premiers to be against apartheid, Helen Keller, almost an impossible path to take at that time. She had no collateral, no economic value, and was mentally and physically challenged in a society that institutionalized people who showed any defect of character, right? What will Harry and Meghan do to further the elevation of our species, to bring us together and say we're all human, we speak a common language? How can we escalate that conversation? Mary Seacole, now long past, how can her legacy support your goals? How can her fortitude, by looking back? I know from reading and studying Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi, if they can change at the time the most powerful governments to remove institutions, then I think our challenges on a daily basis need to be put in perspective. Benazir Bhutto, first Prime Minister of Pakistan, a Muslim country, twice a Pakistan president. Yes, she was murdered, as many will be. That is your conviction. So the words become actions, and the actions, yes, may threaten people. What is your conviction? Mother Teresa, she's in a category of her own. And by the way, her husband also believed in the work that she did. We don't talk about him. These are the issues when we talk about let's elevate the species. I know I've taken a lot longer than I normally do. It is a big topic. It's a global, it's a timeless topic that will go on infinitum. And I'll finish with this. If we continue the baggage that we have been given and set it on the shoulders of our children, then what are we? What have we done? We have incarcerated their minds, their conversation with our limitations. Are you capable of setting a new path for them to think differently, to engage differently, to look for more meaningful contexts of conversation? This is Ronald Allen, Managing Change. You know where to find me.